career in human rights. As part of Renee Kassan's alumni program Capacity Building Series. My name is Mia and I am the Executive Director of Renee Kassan. Those of you who are new to Renee Kassan, we are a UK-based Jewish human rights organization that draws on Jewish teachings, values, and history to advocate and protect human rights in the UK, predominantly those that affect other minority and marginalized groups in the UK. One of our flagship campaigns is our work to empower tomorrow human rights advocates, which is an enriching, leadership-oriented initiative that empowers human rights activists and supporters in their efforts to bring about change in their communities, campus, if you're a student, workplace, and nationally on a wider national level. Now, I'm guessing that many of you here this evening have joined us because you're either in your time of life where you're thinking about your career, and that will probably affect your choice of higher education subjects. Some of you are maybe studying at the moment and already thinking about what next, and the stage and when you apply theory interaction into developing a career. And some of you might already be at the beginning of your career journey. It doesn't matter what stage you are at, because tonight's event is designed for all of you. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker tonight, a longtime friend and founder of Renee Kassan, Vicki Prais. Vicki is an award-winning international human rights lawyer and consultant with nearly 3 decades of experience, specializing in prisoners' rights, prison reform, and the prevention of torture and ill treatment. Her career spans major international organizations, governments, NGOs, and academia, including advisory roles for the UK Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office. She is recognized as a leading detention expert with extensive in-country experience and has been selected for the Council of Europe's CPT expert pool. Vicki, you might explain what that stands for. Vicki is a widely published author, speaker, and panelist on criminal justice and human rights issues, and has served as an expert witness in UK extradition proceedings. Alongside her legal work, she's also a dedicated human rights career coach, supporting hundreds of professionals globally, and us and you lot this evening. So for the next probably 30 minutes, 25, 30 minutes, Vicki and I will engage in a 2-dimensional fireside chat. So imagine us sitting on really comfortable, 2 comfortable lounge chairs with a cup of tea by our sides, as we engage in a conversation about inspiration, impact, skills, and the future. So Vicki, I will begin by saying thank you again. And I guess going back to basics, what first inspired you to pursue a career in human rights? And was there a defining moment that confirmed this was your path?
Thank you, and thank you everybody for kind of turning up this evening, and it's great to meet you all, albeit virtually. So this is a great question to sort of start the ball rolling in terms of my career path and what sort of really motivated me into this work. And I studied law, and I hated my law degree until I could study things like international law, penology, which is a study of prisons and punishment, and civil liberties. And then it suddenly spoke to me, and I suddenly woke up and I enjoyed my law degree. But for me, sort of what inspired me was I always kind of knew that that a career of service, and I know that sounds a little bit trite and a little bit sort of woo-woo, but a career of service was the direction of travel for me. I never saw myself in the world of the suited and booted in terms of the legal world there. But perhaps a first sort of real inspiration for me was when I was studying my law degree. I worked in a prison crash, and I helped the children, or looked after the children, when they were visiting their partners in prison. So that the mums were visiting their partner in prison. And full circle now, my area that I work on is prisoners' rights, prison reform, dignity behind bars. And I think that was a real kind of seminal moment for me in my path, in my career, and a moment of kind of inspiration. And then there have been others since, but I think that probably was something that really inspired me to work in the field of human rights.
And once you made that decision, was it plain sailing, or was there journey, were there bits in the journey where you said, well, actually, maybe it's not that clear. This is what I want to do. It's not about dignity, but it's about something else.
I think everyone's career path in our sector has had aberrations, and points and moment where you think, is this really it? This is what I want to do, and challenging moments and things like that. But plain sailing, I don't think, but grabbing every opportunity that came my way, I think is part of the journey, certainly the journey that I've had there. So, but people deprived of liberty, if we're talking about that, has always been a theme in my practice and in my work since, as I said, I started way back at university.
So you had what I would call a fixed theme, but you moved between different entities. So some of it were INGOs, international governmental organizations, international organizations. You worked within civil society. You were a trustee of Rene Cassin, a faith-based organization, and you're also involved in academia. Um, how did these transitions, were they complementary? Were they straightforward? How did it work, as part of your journey?
Again, a great question there, and I think these experiences in various different elements and areas of the human rights sector has only helped to make me a more multidisciplinary, multifaceted professional. And in fact, to the point where I now call myself a lawyer plus. So lawyering is what I do at the heart. It's, as I say, where I trained, where I qualified, but I do many things above and beyond just the pure lawyering. I'm a lawyer plus a careers coach. I'm a lawyer plus a trainer. I'm a lawyer plus a semi or demi academic, a lawyer plus a sometimes speechwriter. So I think each experience that I've had within the government, so I was human rights advisor to the Foreign Office, in civil society, in academia, has only helped to grow and build me as a human rights professional that I now am, and built my skills, my subject matter expertise, my family as well. I don't talk about networking, I talk about building professional, my family, my human rights family, and all of those institutions and organizations have helped that. But also, I've learned a lot about their role in the human rights project, in the human rights world there, that each performs a very distinct role, if you like, between civil society, who are often there as the eyes and ears and, holding governments to account, also working with the survivors of human rights violations, really at the sharp end. They have a particular role to play. The academics are there to provide the evidence-based policies, upon which many policies are then built from there, but also pushing and testing boundaries and the breadth and depth of human rights protections. And then the international governmental organizations are there more in technical assistance, standard setting, and capacity. So that's also helped me learn kind of what each of these areas of the sector do and how they function.
It's really interesting that you refer to this as the international, as the Human Rights Project, and has different elements. And I'll come back to that phrasing that you use, because we know that the Human Rights Project at the moment, both on a UK level, but certainly on an international level, is under threat.
Mm.
But so but going back to your journey, you have developed deep expertise, and I'm guessing deep interest, in prisoners' rights
Yeah.
and what we call humane detention, whether it's in prisons or one of the campaigns that Renee Kassan works on and we've worked on for many years, which is immigration detention. Um, there must be something beyond the crash in prison that drew you to this, because it's a tough environment of the authorities that you're facing. nor the right holders that you're defending. So why is that why was it critical then, and why is it still critical now?
So as I said before there, people deprived of liberty has always been the theme and the constant and the red line that runs through my practice. But I started life as an immigration and asylum lawyer, actually, and that's where I cut my teeth in the human rights world and where I feel that I was born as a human rights professional that I am. Um, so definitely, that humane detention point is so critical and for me there because the right to liberty is such a fundamental right, okay? And that we can't really exercise fully and meaningfully our rights, if we don't have the right to liberty because we're at somebody's kind of behest there, the authorities, the government, etc. there. So for me, it's a real kind of key to being able to exercise our other rights there. Also, there's something around sort of the fact that people in prison do not lose their rights simply because they are behind bars. And in fact, their rights are even more important and that we kind of protect them there. Uh, Anyone is at risk of being detained. And in this society and the environment that we find ourselves now, that really is a risk for many people, be it human rights defenders, be it lawyers, be it journalists, people from marginalized groups. So that risk of detention is kind of omnipresent almost actually there. So I think that's why this work really speaks to me and why it drives me so deeply. And also there's something there about we as human rights lawyers will kind of support, walk alongside, amplify the voices of the unpopular groups, the groups that, people don't care about and that you want to lock up the key and throw it away kind of thing there. And but as I say, they have human rights and they're rights holders as much as we are living outside of prison walls. So that's a very long answer to your question, but that's where it comes from.
No, I think that's, it's so important nowadays. You see it certainly in what's happening in the streets of the US, where there are, even amongst the migrants or even amongst the illegal migrants, are the more deserving and less deserving, because if you're a criminal, and the same here. So I think that principle of dignity that is at the core, regardless of maybe the environment or the individual, that is, if you had to explain human rights in one word, I think that's what you would use. So it makes complete sense that that is, I can see why you chose a subject or a topic where the value of dignity is so at risk for the most yeah, for the, maybe the most marginalized or the weakest in society. Um, so you adhere to your convictions, your human rights values, the value of dignity. I'm guessing it's not as easy to, when you're advising diplomats or senior policy decision makers, be it in parliament, in other government, um, on these issues. Do you have, maybe an anecdote or two of an interesting conversation?
Yeah.
I guess going straight into the practical stuff, how do you deal with a diplomatic response or a hostile response?
Yeah, and I can give a few stories there, but I suppose and as we, thinking about these questions. So yes, as I mentioned before, one role that I had was as a human rights advisor to the FCDO. I was actually seconded in from a charity called Prisoners Abroad, which helps British nationals in detention overseas, supporting them with welfare support and helping the families as well. So my role and function there, just to give a bit of context, was to advise Foreign Office staff from ambassadors down to consular staff on any human rights issues affecting British nationals in detention overseas. And you can well imagine what kind of issues we were dealing with there: death penalty, prison conditions, fair trial issues there. And I was there to advise on substantively what does human rights law say on this particular issue, and then more kind of practically and strategically, what should the British government be doing on this particular case? When and how should the British government be intervening? And so, thinking about working with diplomats, of course, they have got a lot of other interests at heart and at mind, right? In the mind, when they are thinking about a British national in detention there are other sort of drivers around which might impact how far they go, which might impact what they say, how they say it. But one interesting anecdote to share with you is this, that I was working on a case of a British national who was in detention in Saudi Arabia. And I don't recall what the actual nature of the offence was. And oftentimes I didn't know necessarily what the offence was. But the punishment which he was going to receive was lashes. So lashes there, which, as we know, is contrary to international law and international standards. And so I found myself having quite difficult and challenging conversations with the deputy ambassador, trying to kind of impart to him, what does human rights law say? Why does that amount to sort of degrading treatment, inhuman treatment, etc. And some pushback from them saying, but it's in the national law. This is what. So that was quite a sort of terse exchange that we had there in terms of that. So, and I think they did in the end make some representations, but they perhaps were not as kind of forceful or as emphatic perhaps as I would have liked or wanted there. So yeah, working with diplomats was hugely interesting, but also hugely challenging because they didn't always want to kind of follow your advice and also what we could do within the confines of British government policy as well at the time. They couldn't parachute in and get that British national out. So that's one particular anecdote that sticks in my mind in terms of challenging times, challenging conversations.
Um, Vicky, again, maybe this goes into the practical tips already, but like you said, this is just one of many challenging, maybe difficult times. How did I always have this image on a plane, a parent has to put the air masks on themselves first before they're able to support others.
Mm.
What did you do? Because the human rights is tough. What do you do to sustain yourself and care for yourself
Yeah,
in these
no,
circumstances?
absolutely. And perhaps if I can just mention, the Foreign Office again, because another anecdote to bring you into that topic of self-care. Again, advising this time in Algeria, a British national, a joint British-Algerian national, quite high profile political activist, went back to Algeria, went on hunger strike, and died on hunger strike, died under my watch whilst I was working there. And my role again and function was to advise the post in Algiers what they should be doing in that case and how to manage it. And it was one of the hardest cases that I dealt with, I think, during my time there. There were others, but that was really hard, particularly because he passed away, he died. So we were very fortunate that at the Foreign Office in the consular department, we had a counsellor, and we had a counsellor who was available to us. Not only myself as a human rights advisor, but to any consular staff member, because remember they were dealing with things like suicides abroad, murders overseas, all sorts of different things, humanitarian disasters. So we were able to access the services of the counsellor. So I went and spoke to her, and that helped me to kind of unpack what had happened and to cope with it better. But self-care is really important. And I heard about a concept called proper selfishness, which is this kind of idea that we, exactly as you said, Mia, we have to kind of put our own mask on first before we can help others there. So deploying that proper selfishness, knowing our boundaries, knowing how far we can go. And it's not easy with this work. We can't shut the door and walk away and leave. We can't do that. So I think it's having good support networks around you, knowing yourself, having, including, as I said, counselling if you need that. But really, I think this is needed more than ever now. And also making sure that there's, in any organisation that you're in, that there is really good psychological kind of care and mental health, first aid and things like that, that kind of they understand that and they get it and that they support their staff.
Thank you. I think that's so. I'm going to write down this proper selfishness phrase. So thanks for it. But it's so important what you're saying, this element of self-care. And I think we're in a sector where often we think that the more passionate you are and the more committed and the more I worked for a large human rights organization where people slept in sleeping bags in the office. And I'm not sure, bigger picture, that it was conducive to the human rights project. Because if they burn out, if you burn out, if you don't get the support, then you kind of get lost at some point.
Absolutely right. And there's now actually a lot of scholarship around the fact that burnout for particularly human rights lawyers actually and advocates there, but there's a lot happening in that space. But I know that organizations, for example, like Human Rights Watch, they kind of are investing a lot in that mental health care and support, but they are few and far between. And in fact, many NGOs do not have that kind of care and support network for their staff in place, and they get them to the point where they do burn out and they can't do anything more. And then you are losing great sort of professionals because of that. So there's still quite a long way to go, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. So now if, we move on to, I think probably fast forward in your career journey when you've taken all your learning and all your experiences and the difficult conversations and the managing up as well as managing down. And you've now channeled that. And I think to date you have coached, if I got the number right, over 350 human rights professionals, which is phenomenal. I mean, amazing. Um, what are there common challenges that people face when trying to break into the sector that you've identified? Certainly on a UK, let's start with the UK
Oh, yeah.
environment.
Yeah, no, there are a couple of things that I can kind of definitely share with you in terms of what's coming up, what I'm seeing amongst my kind of client cohort that I work with. I suppose the first is the current climate. I mean, I think we have to sort of say that and name that because, and that's not only here at home in the UK, but that's internationally, and we may come on to that there. But the kind of absence of human rights jobs and roles, or those that are there, are hugely oversubscribed, and so many people applying for them, particularly at the entry level there. So, and that's come from various different sort of reasons and the cuts that we saw with USAID and just the philanthropic climate, etc. there. So that's that, and then the opportunities there. What I'm also seeing amongst challenges there is kind of people getting experience. So they want to apply for a job, but they don't have the requisite experience. But how do they get that experience if they don't apply for a job? So it's that kind of that vicious circle there of, where and how do I get the experience? Um, Another challenge that I'm seeing that I just didn't write down, but that I'm thinking of now is this kind of hamster wheel of internships, which people kind of get onto that internship hamster wheel and they're unpaid, they're exploitative, and they're just wrong and there. And so I'm seeing that a lot, a challenge of kind of getting out of that and actually kind of, getting off the hamster wheel that are internships. Um, and then the final thing, I suppose, is just confidence and selling ourselves. And I'm a huge advocate for kind of self-promotion and personal branding in our sector, but in an authentic way, in a way that works for us and feels comfortable. Because many human rights professionals are like, but I'm doing great work, I'm doing really important work. But if nobody knows about the work that you're doing, then how can you progress? How can you move forward? So I think there's quite a lot of people sort of struggling with that sort of visibility piece and how they present to the world at large, and on paper, etc. there. And I suppose just being our own cheerleader in that way in that moment. So those are the kind of things that I'm seeing coming through and across my desk when I work with people.
Thank you. What skills do you think are essential for a successful career? And I mean, I leave it to you whether you want to add skills and strengths, which are not
Yeah,
necessarily the same, but those qualities that
yeah,
um,
absolutely. And I think, um, I can maybe share some sort of skills and I'll kind of do it in terms of soft skills and then like hard technical skills. And I think the first thing to say, it's not really a skill, but it's going to sound really strange, but to having a real commitment and motivation for
Mhm.
this work to social justice, because this work will touch you and affect you in ways that you may not even know or realize until after the fact. So really caring about the work that you do matters. And as we said there, burnout is a real issue and a real thing. So, and then there are those kind of like non-conventional qualities that we need as human rights professionals, things like curiosity and empathy and integrity, um, patience. We're not going to see the end of torture in a particular country overnight, and actually optimism as well, that we can see change, that there is change, something will move at the end of the day there. Um, Also having cultural competency as well and an understanding, so knowing the culture that we're working in and where we are in the world and sort of aligning ourselves and our work with that and knowing that perhaps people who are there perhaps know better than us, but understanding there. So those are some kind of non-conventional qualities. Other sort of skills or assets, I would say kind of tenacity and resilience. And I say that in two ways. Um, Being tenacious in terms of the job search. So when you are out there looking for roles and opportunities, knowing that you will get rejections, knowing that you will get pushback. So being really tenacious about that and trying to kind of not let it affect you. I know it's easier said than done, but also
Mm.
being tenacious in terms of the work that we do, that we might only get small wins, that we might see a piece of legislation coming in which outlaws torture, or we might see, something like that. So being really tenacious there that in terms of the work that we do. And then that resilience piece as well, and I, alluded to it there, having that mental and physical resilience to do this work and to do it well there. Sometimes you might be going into a part of the world where there are a lot of privations in terms of your private life, your family life. You might be um, working in a container somewhere where there's limited freedom of movement. You might not be able to get regular internet access. Your family, your partner might not be able to come. So having that kind of real mental and physical resilience, I think, is important. And also knowing what your red lines are, what you can and can't cope with. In your own sort of personal, as your personality, that I think is important to know. So those are some kind of soft skills. And then I wanted to kind of just mention a little bit about your hard technical skills. As a human rights professional, I always say that we're a technician, that we have a suite of
Mm.
skills that we deploy in our work there. So really kind of building and growing your technical skills. Things like your writing, research, analytical and drafting
Mm.
skills. This is kind of very central and critical to what we do as human rights professionals. But things like your advocacy and speaking skills, what are we doing if not presenting arguments to governments, to other, policy makers, decision makers, etc. there. Um, Research and documentation skills, but other things that you might not think about necessarily, like project and partnership management. Again, human rights work is a lot about working with other partners, that Arenika-san there. So really having those strong stakeholder and partnership skills, working in alignment with other bodies. Things like budgeting and business planning, as human rights professionals, we might have to manage a budget for a project. So, knowing how to kind of deal with figures. Fundraising and donor outreach, again, we might be asked to contribute to a project proposal, so understanding that sort of fundraising and donor outreach work. And then sort of media skills and strategic communications, so how we sort of do that. So those are just a few hard technical skills that I can suggest. And then finally, languages. Languages really, really set you apart and actually can help propel you in our sector. The number of jobs that I've seen where they need a particular language, and it looks a really interesting opportunity, but I haven't got Arabic, I haven't got Spanish. And it's having a working, either being fluent or having a working level knowledge so that you can really kind of work proficiently in that language. So those that's a really important sort of thing. And also local languages as well is really useful. So those are kind of just a little bit of a set of skills that I've identified and that have kind of pushed me along or helped me along.
You. I think that that's brilliant. I think one of the things that, when you spoke about tenacity, and this is something again I share with you along human rights journey. There are different, the Human Rights Project is made from different levels of contribution, and they're all valid and important. And you
Mm,
might not have the strength, say the mental health strength to be on the front line, but being on the back end and providing the back end support, whether it's from administrative to just writing the campaigns, is part of delivering the human rights project, fulfilling the human rights project. So tenacity goes is also with not only knowing your limits, but also acknowledging the fact that every bit helps. It is a
absolutely.
huge project.
Absolutely. And this is what's wonderful about the human rights space and sector. And again, I always say it's not just the domain of lawyers, that, everybody can come with different skills and gifts and be
Yeah.
part of our sector, be part of our family, if you like, there. And everybody has a meaningful contribution, as you say there, to make, for sure.
Great, thank you. Um, I'm gonna give a shout out. I'm not going to name their names, but a few people, even here on screen, started, and I'll give the Renexa example as interns. We have people that started as 1 week work experience contributors
Mm.
who then came back as interns, who then came back as consultants, who then came back as full-time staff members.
Wow.
So the journey is and I think one of the things I'll reiterate maybe that you said, Vicky, find those volunteering opportunities as much as the paid roles,
Mm.
because as soon as you have your foot in, um, it goes both ways. You learn more about the organization, but the organization learns more about you as well. So
Mm.
definitely, if you can in your stage. Um, what practical steps can inspiring professionals take to stand out beyond? I think some of it in your reference, the language one really stood out to me. I never thought of it.
So what
Um,
practical steps can people take? Yeah, I mean, I've
yeah,
got a few kind of top tips, which is something when I do these talks that I always offer and share, and please know they're just an invitation to you. So I think the first thing is think about where your home is in the human rights sector, because it's huge. There's business and human rights, there's children's rights, women's rights, my area, all sorts of different areas. So think carefully where your heart lies in terms of the area, because that will drive you, that will kind of help your strategy in terms of where you go there. And if you don't know, that's okay too, because it can be a sort of almost like a pick and mix in a way. You'll try a few different areas and you'll very quickly know where you're drawn to in terms of that. And equally as well, there is room to kind of have your core area, and then you'll have other areas that slice through it. So if I give my example, my areas I said is prisoners' rights, prison reform, but women cut through that, children cut through that, marginalized groups cut through that. So, you can have your core and other areas that kind of orbit around it. So, but doing some deep thinking about, what's my mission and where do I want to kind of be in terms of the area, that particular sector. Secondly, this is going to sound strange, but working backwards is an important sort of thing. So, what do I mean by that? I mean looking at roles that interest you, positions that interest you, and looking at what are they looking for in terms of academics? What are they looking for in terms of expertise, experience, and things like that, so that you are as well placed as you can be when you apply for that kind of position to say, well, I've actually got the social media experience, I've actually got the policy writing work there. So looking at that, and then also just doing a bit of a forward look as well to 3 to 5 years where you see yourself. Where do you see yourself in terms of the role, the organization, and where in the world do you want to be? Because as human rights professionals, we can be at home, we can be internationally there. And then from there, thinking, well, what subject matter expertise do I need to help me to get to work on, you know, um, corporate accountability, whatever it may be? What skills do I need? And who do I need to connect to help me get there? Because our sector is as much about connectedness as any other sector. And I don't shy away from that, actually. I think we need to kind of know that. So that's the second kind of piece that I can offer in terms of just, that forward look to work and working backwards from there. Thirdly, as I said there, I don't talk about networking. I talk about building your human rights family and building your circle of opportunity. So how do you kind of do that in a way that feels comfortable to you, that feels authentic to you? Because when we talk about these terms, they immediately feel a bit icky, right? And stuff like that. And we feel very awkward talking to strangers. All of this kind of thing. But if we do it in a way that is right for us, it can be hugely valuable, hugely. And it's really about relationship building. It's kind of building authentic and nurturing relationships that are both and trying for it not to be too transactional. So you're supporting that person and they're supporting you in terms. So thinking about building family with intention. So what are what's your kind of strategy behind this there? Is it to connect to someone in a particular human rights organization where you see yourself, where you would like to be? Is it to learn more about a particular job opportunity? Is it to kind of build your visibility and credibility? Is it to upskill, to build your knowledge? So really sort of thinking about that sort of circle of opportunity and how you kind of do it, and also doing it both in the online and the in offline or in real life space. Um, you know, online is great, but being in the room is even better. And when you're in the room, be there, sit at the front, ask questions, be visible, and people will get to know you. And that kind of brings me on to my next tip around sort of being visible and audible there. So becoming a sort of a bit of a thought leader in your area, thinking about how you position yourself. As I say, when I go to meetings, I love to sit at the front row and I love to ask a question because already then you're starting a conversation with your panel and you can kind of go and talk to them afterwards there. And then when you are being visible and audible on online, if you post something on LinkedIn, add your voice to the debate, add your sort of insights on that. Don't just post and then, off you go. But, what do you want to say? What do you want to add to this there? So doing that with kind of a little bit of strategy behind it, again, is important. And kind of aligned to that is a top tip is learn to love LinkedIn because it can be your best ally in so many ways in terms of building family, connecting to people who, are in roles that you see yourself in or in organizations that you see yourself in. It can be a way, as I say, of building your thought leadership, your visibility, your kind of expertise. And it can help you in your job search as well. Jobs are advertised on there, so you can use it as that. So that's something that is really powerful and I think, a good tip. And also getting comfortable with informational interviews as well. We don't embrace them enough here. They do them a lot in the States and in North America, but I think getting comfortable with kind of reaching out to people and saying, I'd love to learn more about your journey, about your path. You're not asking for a job, you're not asking for more than that, just about what was their route in. And you can be sure that, they will offer some great insights and advice and things like that. So that's something that I always encourage young professionals to do. Writing is a great thing as well to do, writing and as I say, in a bid to kind of build your thought leadership. And it doesn't need to be a huge big academic article. That you're writing for blogs. So there are a couple of venues where you can write for blogs, which are specifically for aspiring and emerging human rights professionals. Oxford Human Rights Hub has got a blog, which is great, and Jurist as well. Both online, they're regularly looking for contributions from students, from young professionals, early career professionals there. Knowing your sector, I know that sounds really obvious, but knowing all the key issues in your sector, knowing what the hot topics are, what's coming up in that sector, and where there are kind of areas that cut across. So the impact, for example, of AI on your particular sector, or where does maybe climate cuts across your sector, your work, but and connecting also to the thought leaders in your sector. So those people who are really speaking regularly and with great authority and credibility, and connecting to them, following them, and trying to kind of get into their family, I suppose. Uh, Volunteering, as you mentioned there, I don't call it volunteering, I call it human rights on the side. So that and volunteering is great, but I think with a bit of caution. Firstly, I would always advocate for paid opportunities. What I mentioned before there about the hamster wheel there, but also thinking about what do you want to get out of this opportunity there. So of course you're supporting that organization, but what are the things you want to get out of it? How can this opportunity help to build your subject matter expertise? How can it help to build your skill set? Thinking of you as a technician. And then how can this grow your family? How can this grow your network, there? So that's something that I would suggest to people, but also knowing how much you can give. If you can only give 2 hours a month, that's all you can give, but give it with, full heart and with, that. But you can be sure that if you offer your services to an organization, if you give an inch, they'll take a mile. So be very intentional about that and push back if they want to ask more. And then the final thing really is building your board of advisors. And what do I mean by that? I mean building your own personal board of advisors, kind of your board of trustees, if you like, because believe me, it's very difficult to go it alone in this sector on your own. So building your board made up of cheerleaders and allies, people who are just there to cheerlead you, to support you, made up of space makers, people who are in rooms where you are not, but who can help to bring you into those rooms and those spaces, who will speak about you, mentors who walk alongside you and offer insights, advice, guidance, and then people like myself who are coaches. So we come in with very particular work that we offer and packages that we offer, and we help you to get to a particular point and place and moment. So I have my own board of advisors who, I work support me. People are coming in and out of that board all the time, but I cherish them and I value them, and they've been a huge support. So those are a few kind of top tips and advice that I can offer as you're starting out.
That's incredible, Vicky. And I'll share with everyone that you have kindly offered to share these tips, which we will circulate in post-event wrap up. But that's incredible. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to jump to the um, not back to the future, but future to the future.
Mhm.
And going back to the Human Rights Project, what do you think is the fate, say, in 5, 10 years' time,
Mm.
of the Human Rights Project as we define it today?
No, absolutely. And I think we're at a really critical moment now, actually, for the Human Rights Project as we know it thus far, right? With the framework, with the rule of law, with the institutions and the bodies there, it's really, really a worrying time when international law is disregarded, is pushed aside, for other sort of interests and things like that. So, but it's a moment when we should be kind of doubling down actually on human rights and trying to protect them even more there. I think we're at a moment of what I've read it is a polycrisis when we have so many things going on at the moment there between global conflicts, between inequalities, economic inequalities, etc. there, between the rise of authoritarianism and populist governments around the world, etc. there, and not too far from home here as well. And also we're seeing on the other side shrinking civil society space that the society space for them to work in is becoming more and more restricted and challenging in terms of the work that they can do. So, and then finally, just kind of the relevancy of international organizations like the UN and the role that they play. So it feels like a bleak future, but I'm hoping that we can kind of come through it, and that maybe we have to revision what human rights looks like there. But as I say, that we will see a place and space for the Human Rights Project to continue, but it might be in a slightly different iteration. But those are my thoughts, really.
Yeah, no, I think we can't give up on the project. I think too much was invested. Otherwise, I am firstly going to thank Vicky for taking the time and sharing such useful wisdom and experience and tips. We will share a bit of information in the roundup email. It'll come through the Eventbrite, so tomorrow or latest on Friday. Um, and certainly you can get in touch with us if you want to get in touch with Vicky, or Vicky you directly. I don't want to presume anything, but
The best way to kind of get to me is either on LinkedIn, because I spend half my life there, or I really genuinely do, or just via my website as well. There's a contact me page, so ping in, and then that pings into my email there. So, and please don't be a stranger. I'm more than happy to. I always offer just a half an hour call with somebody to help untangle your career a little bit. So.
amazing. We're gonna try and share that in the chat. We just shared a link, a very, very quick survey. If you could please fill it in. We need it so we can continue doing what we do well and improve even more. So it won't take you more than a couple of minutes, but it'd be great if you could fill it in. Join our newsletter. Again, if you go into the Renee Kassan, we have website. We have an exciting schedule of events coming up. We now work in series. So this event is part of our empowerment series, and there will be more sessions like this coming up. We've got our running international law series and some exciting topics coming up, including sexual violence in conflict, international jurisdiction, international law in post-conflict situations. Again, it's very much about understanding international law and how it applies in today's, changing by the second political, geopolitical environment. We have a series in partnership with an organization that provides testimonies by second and third generation Holocaust survivors. So our themes are very much going to be based on, say, access to food and bring testimonies on difficulties in accessing food during the Holocaust and World War II. And what does it mean in today's environment in the UK? Accessing housing, the role, the experience of witnessing a war crime, whether it was committed 75 years ago or as we come up to the 4th-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine. So really exciting sessions coming up. Do sign up to our newsletter.